their writing with their with evidence-based instructional practices that will move students along in their development of the underlying literacy skills that underlie both reading and writing. Something that's been informing my work and that I want to think about with the brilliant teachers of Michigan is the application of different components of writing that have been found through new models of research. I'm blown away by Dr. Kim's work that's been recently coming out on a model that she's calling the direct and indirect effects of writing. And I think that we've entered a new era in writing research and potential for improving students' literacy skills from this model. So I wanted to try to use her model as a framework for a lot of the work that I've been doing, and she's been using it for much of the funded work that she's been doing. And after we set up this series, Rebecca and I set up this series, I reached out to Dr. Kim and I was like, hey, we're using your model. Would you be interested in maybe dropping by and being a surprise guest? And she said yes. So I'm blown away that she said yes. Tonight, what I want to go through is hear from the author's own voice what this model looks like, briefly overviewing it. And then the whole series was set up for each monthly session, we're going to take a deep dive into a couple of components of the model because it's pretty complex. So we broke it down. Tonight's pieces are the end point of writing. We're going to start out with defining that end point so that our next few months can be the other components that build to that end point. We know where we're going. We're going to spend some time, I'll spend some time talking about the definitions of these two pieces. I'm going to give one instructional example, and then I really want to know what you see as the experts in the classrooms as strengths in current writing instruction that address these pieces that we think will be major levers for improving students' literacy. And then what are some opportunities that we might be able to partner on to enhance instruction. I'll briefly talk a little bit about assessment insights and limitations of current research. And then we have a little exercise that will enhance our learning together the next time. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kim to talk about her model, which this is excerpted from one of her articles published in the journal Reading and Writing.
Hi, everyone. Very, very nice to meet you. I'm honored and thrilled to be able to join you. I'm also envious, envious that you have this meeting. And I really wish and hope that we have something like that in California as well. So if you know someone in California interested, I'll be the first one to join. So thank you so much for, well, it's actually, I looked at the chat and it's actually amazing to see people all over the country joining us. And thank you so much for sharing your time, and really excited about this opportunity because when I was teaching, I taught in elementary and high school. And when I was teaching, I taught reading and writing, and of course, but I didn't feel that I had a lot of, I had a good understanding about, what contributes to development of writing and therefore how to teach. So, I'm thrilled that I'm actually be able to unpack it and kind of, I guess, contribute a little bit about understanding what contributes to writing development. So as Adria kind of showed you here, so this is kind of a theoretical model. And let me unpack this a little bit. So this is a little bit of, I have a newer version, slightly very similar, but a slightly updated version in a recent journal article in the Journal of EdPsych. I mention it because in this Journal of EdPsych, article, I actually have a table that shows what each of these are. So I talk about working memory, I talk about shifting, I talk about, all these different pieces. So that might be a little bit helpful. But let me go over each of them here. Actually, let me see if I can. Trying to work through, there we go. Okay. So I want to focus on, so it's in the center, I can't use my cursor here, but I hope that you're looking at the center and the top. Thank you. Thank you so much. So reading comprehension and written composition is right there, right? So you see the arrows kind of pointing at each other. That means they support each other. I think my speculation at this point is, initially actually reading comprehension supports reading comprehension, writing, and then at a later phase, it's actually more bidirectional. But anyways, so reading comprehension, written composition are at the top, and that's kind of ultimately what we're talking about. But for students to get there, right, to be able to read something and comprehend something, and to be able to produce a written product that makes sense and that are coherent, they actually need all the other pieces in this figure. So let me look at the middle panel. If you look at on the left, you see a box right underneath, right there, thank you. Lexical level literacy and transcription skills. So that's really, that includes your ability to read words and spelling. And for writing, we need handwriting or keyboarding. We don't need those two, handwriting or keyboarding for reading comprehension, but we do for writing. The reason why they're all together is because word reading and spelling require basically the same set of skills. Students' understanding of phonological structure of a language, that's phonological awareness. Students' understanding of letters and orthographic patterns that are allowed. So that's orthography, right? So understanding of graphemes, digraphs, trigraphs, faultines, and some constraints, etc. And semantics, more specifically, that's actually morphology, morphological awareness. So children's understanding of word parts and their meanings and how they're related to actually spelling patterns, right? And there's a huge body of literature that show that students' phonological awareness, morphological awareness, orthographic awareness, they are really founding kind of cornerstones for word reading and spelling development. So that's why they're there. What that means is to develop word reading and spelling, and also a handwriting piece. Handwriting is slightly different, but let me just put them together for now. Students need solid understanding or explicit and systematic instruction on phonological awareness, orthographic awareness, and morphological awareness. So we've known about this, we put them together here in this box. So that's on the left. Now, if you go to the right side in the middle panel, that's discourse language. I called it discourse language here. In the more updated version, I called it also discourse oral language and / oral composition. So what is discourse language, right? So that's, it includes comprehension and production of discourse level oral language. Discourse oral language is engaging in, say, multi-utterance conversations, or your ability to listen. Like for now, you're engaging in listening comprehension, right? You listen and understand, right? Or your ability to listen to stories or informational text and understand it, or produce something. Right now, I'm engaging in oral discourse, oral language production. I'm looking at this figure and I'm producing something in more than a sentence level, right? That should be coherent, I hope. So that's oral language. Discourse level oral language, it's not word level, it's beyond a single word, it's beyond a single sentence, it's actually connection, right? The connected text in oral language. The reason why I call this, another name for it is oral composition. Is especially in the beginning phase of writing development, your ability to compose something orally, that's actually approximating your written composition. Minus you're actually, of course, you need transcription skills, your ability to spell words and handwriting, keyboarding necessary. But you can actually approximate your students' oral composition with the written composition. That's kind of the big idea. So this piece, although it's in a single box, it's a huge, like so-called large complex piece, right? For me to produce what I'm doing right now, it involves a lot of things. So what does it involve, right? So underneath discourse oral language, you have higher order cognition and regulation. So for me to produce something coherent right now, I need to have a reasoning skill. I need to also be able to make inferences. I need to have an understanding of different perspectives. So I need to have an understanding of what am I understanding, what are my views, what is the view or your understanding, the listener's understanding or in a perspective. If I'm, say, producing something, or if I'm listening something, I need to have an understanding of characters, story writers' perspective, etc. And I need to also monitor what I'm doing. So I need to monitor whether what I'm saying right now makes sense to you, or am I mispronouncing things? If I'm not comprehending well, like listening comprehension, right? If I'm not comprehending a story, what do I do? Am I going to ask a question to the person who was telling me a story, etc.? So that's the higher order cognition and regulation. I'm regulating myself. I'm monitoring my own comprehension, monitoring my own production, and take up some repair strategies. Beyond that oral discourse oral language, it also required what I call foundational oral language skills. Those are vocabulary and grammatical knowledge. So for me to produce this text right now, I'm talking right now, for me to do that, of course, I need to have knowledge of vocabulary words, individual words that I'm using, right? I also need to be able to combine all these individual words in chunk and make sense, right? It should make sense to you. So that's syntactic grammatical knowledge. So all these pieces are not necessary for discourse oral language. So for grammatical knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, inference making, reasoning, all these pieces are necessary for discourse oral language. So those two pieces on the left in the middle and panel, lexical literacy and discourse oral language are in the middle because those two are big chunks, two big chunks necessary for written composition. In other words, if we're missing one of them, there's not going to be written composition. So say I'm given a prompt, a topic, and I generate, okay, I'm going to think about what I'm going to write. I generate ideas. Okay, I think about, okay, what words am I going to say, right? So for that, I'm going to draw on my vocabulary knowledge, and I'm going to construct sentences about what to say. I can do that, and I can produce oral composition, right? I can produce something that I'm going to say, but in oral version, I can do that. But if I don't have spelling skill or handwriting skill, there's no written composition. There's only oral composition. There's no written composition, right? Because written composition by definition means written product. So that's why we need a transcription skill. On the other hand, we need, if just having transcription skill, spelling and handwriting skill alone is not sufficient, right, for written composition, because even if you're a fantastic speller and your handwriting, your keyboarding is superb, if you don't have things to say that's translated into sentences and words, and things are making sense, if you don't have that, which is the right side of this model, there's then no coherent written composition, right? So that's why those two pieces in the middle panel are necessary. Do you mind going back to the right, upper right, world content topic discourse knowledge? So that's there because when I'm given a writing topic to write about, of course, I need to have something to write about. Where does that something come from? My content knowledge, world knowledge, right? So if I'm asked to write about what I did over the weekend, I need to have something to write about. So that's where why the content knowledge is important. There's also discourse knowledge there. Discourse knowledge includes one's genre knowledge and associated, genre features, text structure knowledge, and the strategies associated with using these different features and etc. Because different genres require different text structures, right? So that's necessary, and that's actually that contributes to both the reading and writing and discourse oral language. Depending on what genre I'm in, I'm going to present the information in different ways. On the left upper corner, social emotion. So that's the construct that includes multiple pieces like motivation, attitudes, self-concepts, belief towards writing, attitude towards writing, my motivation towards writing. That's there because it becomes particularly important for as children develop writing skills. Writing tasks become more complicated, and they need to sustain themselves through this writing process, right? Developing ideas, working on initial draft and revising and etc. So that's why it's there. Now, at the very bottom, we have domain general cognitions or executive function. It's at the very bottom, and you see two arrows, both pointing, one pointing at the lexical level literacy, and the other one pointing at the discourse oral language that includes the foundational language in higher order. It's because we need this for everything, right? So our working memory, our ability to hold something in our memory right now and be able to process it at the same time, our ability to focus on something and sustain our attention, that's important for everything, not just kind of actually our phonological awareness, developing phonological awareness, developing vocabulary knowledge, but also even math, everything actually. All learning requires these domain general cognitions. So that's why it's there as a foundation. So that's kind of the basic structure of this model. Let me pause here if there's any questions or comments.
We'd love to have somebody else's voice to ask a question out loud, but if you feel more comfortable putting your question in chat, do that too.
Yeah, questions on chat would be great. I'm not Sky. Were you going to say something? Were you if you could, I don't know if it is possible at all. Rebecca, if it is possible for me to share actually one slide that I have, let me see if this might be helpful. I'm not sure. Okay, so
you should be able to share, Dr. Kim.
Okay, thank you so much. I have one quick slide. I just wanted to show you because this might be helpful to kind of further understand what I just talked about. So do you see this piece with the multiple layers? Yes? Okay, great. So this is included in the kind of a recently published paper. This is a somewhat different representation of what I just talked about. So what it shows is in multiple planes, how these things work together. So this is the writing process, right? The process that occurs when we write. So first we generate ideas, right? We think about, okay, on a given topic, we think about what we're gonna write about. And then of course we have to translate those ideas into words and sentences, right? That's translation. And then we evaluate while we are doing that, we evaluate, okay, is this a good enough? Is this good? And then we transcribe, right, those translated ideas, sentences, and words into written product, right? So that's the writing process. this process is, regulated by these motivation and affect, right? Setting the goals, planning to write, and etc. But the pieces that I just talked about in the figure that I showed you, these are all here, and these are contribute in these different processes. So when I generate ideas, my topic knowledge is relevant, right? If my writing task requires reading source materials, my reading ability will contribute to idea generation, right? And then when I translate these ideas into translating oral language, of course, my oral language skills, right? If I know a lot of vocabulary words, I will pick very precise vocabulary. So vocabulary and grammatical knowledge and others contribute to translation process. For the transcription process, our spelling ability, handwriting, and keyboarding will contribute. For the evaluation, all these multiple pieces actually contribute. And then domain general pieces that I talked about are here as underlying supporting system for all these pieces. I'm showing this to you because some of you may be more familiar with this writing process in the previous theoretical models. But what I showed you is more kind of focusing on this, but these really map onto each other. So students utilize all these skills throughout the process of writing. So I thought I would share that with you. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, I know you had mentioned this was published in my library. For some reason, did not have access to the in-press JET articles. So I was like, oh, I can't get it yet.
Right, I can share with you those who are interested. If you could just send it to send me an email, I'll be very happy to share that. It just came. It was accepted a while ago, but then with the pandemic, the publisher, the APA is taking quite some time to have it available online, which is very unusual. So it just finally came out available online. So it looks like there's a question.
Hi, can I ask a question about the model?
Absolutely.
So this is a very beginner question. This is one of the first times I'm looking at it deeply. So forgive me if it's a very surface question, but at the top you have social emotional, and then down at the bottom you have affective, you have executive functioning. So I'm wondering how and why you can separate those and why one would go at the top and one would go at the bottom. Is there a reason for why they're on the outsides?
That's a great question. The reason why I have, let me show you just in case, just kind of as a reminder. So the model, right? So this is the one. So the reason why I have social emotions is because the literature suggests that actually how students feel about themselves as a writer, that's really based on their experience of their spelling words and their writing. So if they constantly experience success with the spelling words and writing, they feel good about themselves as a writer, they become confident, and they don't develop negative anxiety toward writing. Whereas, the negative experience, of course, develops negative social emotions, right? So that's why this is located on this side, because it interacts with, spelling and then also written composition. The reason why these domain general cognitions, these are down here, is because this is the foundation for every learning. So this supports this, and this supports all these pieces. And so working memory and everything influences written composition, for example, because they influence all these different pieces. That was a great question. I don't know if I answered the question completely, but so that's it. One piece I encourage you to do, as Adria and others talk about SRSD, for example, you can think about this. Where does SRSD hit? right? SRSD hits a lot of things, but not everything. So we actually have right now a study we call SRSD plus. We are adding pieces to SRSD. For example, SRSD does not explicitly address transcription, right? We added that. It doesn't explicitly address sentence construction and vocabulary. We address that. So, SRSD is the fantastic, the most evidence-based, right, approach to writing instruction. But it's we're trying to kind of add and even make it even better. So again, their theoretical models has a really direct implications for instruction, because of the theoretical model, what we have included here, that means they have to be directly taught. So SRSD hits on many different things here, like, for example, text structure knowledge. It does hit self-regulation, right? So something that you might want to pay attention to.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Kim, can you, for everyone else, can you give the language, the SRSD is define that self-regulated
Strategy development.
For those people that don't know that, that's the work of Graham, correct? Graham and Harris?
Yes. Harris, Karen Harris and Steve Graham.
Stephen Graham.
Yes. They developed.
For anyone that doesn't know that.
Yes, thank you.
Any other last questions for Dr. Kim on this model? We will get it updated for month.
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the world content and discourse knowledge? I appreciated the direct in your other model, that direct line to the reading, because I think about that with equity. We can't write what we don't know about.
So say a little bit more. Yes, absolutely. So this is involved in the very initial phase, right? So for example, what is an example? If you're asked to write about dinosaurs, my son, for example, will have plenty to talk about. I have very little to talk about. I know very little about dinosaurs, right? So that's just an example, simple example of content knowledge. So I do not know much about dinosaurs, so I cannot really generate very rich ideas. That means, of course, limited ideas. And of course, even if I use a lot of superb vocabulary and sentence structure, the quality is not going to be as good.
That's always the hard part. And one of the pieces of our project that we're trying to look at is looking more closely at the informational genre, which we have a lot on narrative, we have a little bit on persuasive. I know SRSD, a lot of SRSD work has worked really well with the persuasive writing genre. In my project, we're trying to use some informational genre to give the students a passage first so that they can draw the information from the text, which is one of our goals in the standards. So attempting to do that, but then of course you get the whole reading component as well.
Exactly. That's why I have reading there. Part of the reasons why we have reading there is because, especially when you have source materials for writing task, your reading skill will determine the quality of writing, even if it doesn't involve source material. Writing task does not involve writing source materials. For good quality writing, you have to reread your own writing, right? So that requires not only word reading, but also your own mental representation of what you have written down. That's reading comprehension.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the mental representation piece. So I'm assuming Kinch's interaction or construction integration model is underlying that part.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, well, I'm going to shift to instruction so that we can have some good, rich discussion about what's happening in classrooms around these bigger pieces. So thank you so much for providing a lot of this really complex process that is just so amazing to have light lit upon each of those pieces. Because I think typically what we start out with is this piece of the goal of written composition, which is students creating a written composition that then indicates the culmination of their writing achievement. And typically what we find that looks like is a holistic appraisal of the students' effectiveness in their composition to reach whatever communication goal was defined by the task. So if they're writing a letter to their parents, they have a communication goal. If they're writing to persuade their classmates to do something, they have a communication goal. And then there's the amount of text they produce, quantity, but then the quality of that text to reach the goal. Speaking of what Dr. Kim was talking about in terms of like this discourse level, I'm trying to understand what is this broader discourse level of text. I found this really interesting graphic that is based on theoretical work by Walter Kinch saying, you know, we process individual words that form sentences and process those one at a time, but they are updating this mental representation that we have of whatever concept that we're listening to or concept that we're writing about. And so there's been lots of ways of representing this holistic effectiveness of reaching a communication goal mostly through rubrics. And I think that's what a lot of the people in the room have been using, and what's often used as our outcome in a lot of our research studies when we're investigating pieces of writing. And so there's been variations of different ways to represent this, but mostly they all seem to come together in that we expect some type of introduction, lead or hook, and then a wrapping up at the end, a conclusion. We often look for people to include main ideas, topic sentences, and then the claims or supporting details or evidence that support those things. We want to make sure that, or as we're communicating, that we're communicating coherently, and that there's confusion among the sentences that we're also producing. Something that's often included is sentence fluency, so students' abilities to put together both simple and compound sentences and complex sentences where the need arises, and varying them, having precise and varied word choice, and then of course conventions being mechanics pieces. And so what's interesting is most of these things, even though they're very different, tend to all hang together in that students with good writing quality tend to have most of these pieces, and students with poor writing quality tend to have fewer of almost all of these pieces. So this is kind of just a paraphrase definition for writing quality and a paraphrase definition for this overall discourse level piece where we might be ordering ideas in a logical and coherent way to meet our communication goal that is usually genre specific. So I pulled out some fifth graders from the sample that I collected a while ago. So I asked students to type a response. They read a passage about camels and described how camels were the ships of the desert. And then we asked the fifth graders to write an informational letter to a friend who's recently moved to the desert. And I included a sample of a fifth grader who had a lower score on overall writing quality. and a student who had a higher score on overall written quality. And so you can see kind of the features that make this one higher quality than the other. So the student writing to Lucas has a structure that has a beginning and a conclusion, and it goes logically through with a first of all, and then another connective later with a more importantly. It's kind of guiding you through. Whereas this poor student just kind of dives right in. I'm going to tell you what my point is. And then it's not really coherent. You don't really get an idea of what the point is until later. You can see both have a few mechanical errors, but of course the student with the poor quality tends to have more of those errors that are not just in spelling, but also with putting sentences together within the sentence, and then adjacent sentences, putting them together. So you can kind of see that idea of the coherence across there. So I want to go by this kind of quickly to get into how do we instruct overall discourse and find out a little bit about how you do this in your schools. I'm gonna start off by going into self-regulated strategy development as a model way to instruct at the discourse level. I'm often asked by superintendents and principals if you could pick a reading program for, if you go to school and you pick the ideal reading program, what would you select? I'm like, oh, well, it depends. And I'll have a whole list of 5 different things that I think are good and the general concepts that might be good for instruction. But for writing, I don't waffle. For writing, there is one method that has just had completely overwhelming, bowls me over evidence. In What Works Clearinghouse, where you can find the effectiveness of interventions, you have a few with reading that show potentially positive effects, and you have a few numbers of studies to support that. But for self-regulated strategy development, we have dozens of well-implemented, high-quality studies that have positive effect sizes, and honestly, effect sizes that are 3 times larger than any other effect sizes that we see in education. So hands down, if you ask any of us, what is the best writing instruction that exists? It's self-regulated strategy development. It works for grades 2 through 12. Young is working on some doing SRSD and SRSD plus with first graders. I love that work. That's been super cool. And it's also been highly effective for students with disabilities, with learning disabilities, students with emotional behavior disorders, students who are at risk for not meeting grading level standards, and it's been effective at tier 1 as well. The other exciting thing is that writing in response to reading text has a large impact on reading. It also has shown some good impacts of writing on other content area development, like science and social studies. The other amazing reason that I always put this as the best way, or definitely at the top of your list to consider if you're considering revamping your writing instruction, is because it's so accessible. It's so easy to have out there. I know Young's had lots of conversations with Karen Harris. I've had just a few conversations with Karen Harris, and she's always indicated that she wants this to be easily accessible by everyone out there. She never wants to put any barriers. Her goal is accessibility. So this book I hand out to all of my friends, and you can get it for $20 to $40 online. It has all of the strategies in there. You can print off copies of it to use. It's very easy. And you can also get some free materials that are some of the same pages out of this book from thinksrsd.org. And they also have both virtual courses and live professional learning. I know Leslie Rod had signed up for this. I don't think she's here. I didn't quite see her on the list, but Leslie is this amazing SRSD savant, has taught this with so many students. And she is part of, I believe, Think SRSD. Oh, there's Leslie. Oh, that was her asking a question. She's really the excellent person to teach this. I have to confess that I didn't know about this when I was in a school, so I have never personally taught this, but that will not stop me from suggesting it and also getting to understand people's experience with it. I have heard that it does take a little while to pick up. It's not something that is a simple fix, like leveled texts are a simple fix. All you need are the books and you're off and teaching. This you do have to spend some time learning how to do it, but I think that's what makes it powerful. Well, I know that's what makes it powerful. So what I'm really interested in, So first I wanted to go through what these stages are so that you have just kind of an idea, a general idea of what is included in self-regulated strategy development. It includes 6 stages. These are not 6 individual lessons, but they are multiple sessions until the students have reached their goal for that stage. So at stage 1, it's developing background knowledge of written composition. So you pick a very specific genre. Teachers write their own responses in these genres, and then the class together reads other students their age, the types of models of these genres. And then they discuss what's in there, what makes this good writing, discussing both the content that's in these texts, as well as that really critical piece that Dr. Kim pointed out, which is the self-regulation piece. So all of us, well, I'm speaking for everybody, but speaking for myself, I know I get very frustrated with writing and have to keep myself motivated and engaged and persisting. So these strategies are really important for all of us as writers to acknowledge and to keep working on. You also in the state, luckily, have this amazing person. I see Julie Bremer in the chat. Thanks, Julie, for talking about this stuff. She has taught this as well with students in elementary and middle school and students with disabilities, and has been very effective in doing so. So I think she's one of your best resources here in Michigan for teaching SRSD. Second stage is discuss it. So this is the tangible thing that you see a lot with SRSD, which is the specific strategies of a graphic organizer. So for example, for informational writing, it's times, which is the topic, the ideas. Then you have main ideas and supporting details, and then wrapping it up at the end. There's also a strategy for how to take notes while you're reading. And then at this stage, you discuss with each other the good and poor essays for different elements that are in there. Again, a huge piece of focusing on the attitudes and beliefs about writing and setting goals and graphing kind of your baseline where you're at. The teacher models the their own generation, so thinking aloud, self-statements, and then graphing their own goals, helping students create their self-statements, and discussing other ways to generalize this. Students make these self-statements and the strategies their own by memorizing it and understanding rationale for using those strategies. Teachers and students work collaboratively to support both the strategies, the self-regulation, and the content, and then gradually fade out the graphic organizers that are used as prompts. And students might develop their own shorthand of their prompt. And then finally, students are using this independently, and teachers monitor and support or enhance as needed. So what I'm really interested in is if people can dump in the chat what your writing curriculum is. Do you integrate other products, programs, or approaches with that base writing program? And then as you're writing that, I'm hoping one or two people might be brave enough to share with us what they see as some of these bigger picture items that are in their instruction in schools. What are the strengths of your current instruction for addressing this discourse level piece? And then maybe what are some opportunities for advancing that? Yeah, thanks to Rebecca, the MESA units of writing, that's what I was assuming that many people use. When were those developed?
Sometime before 16. I want to say maybe 20. Chris Martin, are you still here? I'm thinking somewhere between 2012 maybe and 2016.
Do you see, what elements do you see in there to build upon? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, not a lot. And I don't particularly, the schools that are working with them tend to not partner with us quite so much because we're much more about focusing on direct and explicit and building. And I'm working with a school that has a Wonders unit, the Wonders curriculum, and we've pulled way back, and we are focusing on, we did some training around writing, and the Think SRSD was introduced, right? Because in Wonders right away, they start in kindergarten, they have to write a sentence. So we talked about subword word in the kindergarten and first grade, and then moving forward, how we're connecting our writing to a topic that they're reading about. That's what I was asking Dr. Kim about that, because we see a lot of just prompt writing that's just random writing, not connected to, so we can't even have community discourse because everyone's writing something different. And so there's a lot of work to be done, thus the invite, right? So, and I think SRSD, I've just slowly started to introduce that to people in a little bit of time. So I really appreciated you coming behind and lifting it.
Yeah, that's the big challenge, right? Is then supporting implementation. What we tend to see in research is people have to piece together their writing curricula because things like Wonders probably doesn't have all of the pieces that they need to fully do that. But we find that in reading too, right? Our reading pieces to piece together, but more so for writing. And so that makes it a giant challenge to both implement and then sustain practices that are going to be most effective for kids. The one thing I really love about these models, and then also things like the IES practice guide, is pointing out the pieces that make things effective, so we can highlight those in the instructional components that we have. So thank you, so many of you, for talking about the writing pieces that you have. If you don't mind, I'm going to just save the chat just to get an idea, because I really appreciate the sharing that you've had on here. And then in the interest of time, I'm going to move into the assessment piece. There was one question in the chat. Somebody was talking about rubrics. Somebody asked a question about specific rubrics. And I think one of the main points that I want to make about assessment is it's not as essential to have the exact right rubric. Mostly because rubrics are a holistic assessment anyway. So most of the time we find that, yes, some rubrics do work slightly better than others, but for the most part, what a rubric is telling you is more a holistic judgment of the student's overall writing ability. And while it can sometimes help you identify some specific pieces, like if the student doesn't have an introduction or a conclusion, your rubric's going to tell you that part. But it's not quite as helpful to guide the most effective instruction. And so we often use these rubrics as our outcome measure, what we're trying to get to. This represents a summative state that we're trying to get to. And so one of the places, and I was wondering if people can quick pop in the chat 1 through 5, which one of these things you use in your school as your assessment. And then I'm going to point to this one I have bolded here, which is number 4, something that's based on a specific strategy with elements that you're looking for that will help then guide instruction and help guide students to self-assess what components they have in there. And so what's really great in the SRSD materials is they have these pieces where students can self-assess. Do I have a good hook or intro? Do I have good topic sentences? Do I have supporting 3 ideas and supporting evidence and summing it up? So I just wanted to highlight that's really helpful. I've been exploring a whole bunch of other metrics that tell us different pieces of information. A couple of things I want to highlight here.
Dr. Truckenmiller, you're not presenting, so I think, are you trying to show us a slide?
Oh my gosh.
I think we stopped sharing and then, yeah, so that we can, I was looking for people to pop in the chat what they're assessing.
The five things. So yeah, here they are. Yeah, so while you're doing that, yeah, there's a couple of things I want to highlight about assessment. Interestingly, if you just want to get a real quick idea of where kids are at, the amount that they write is highly correlated with their writing quality. Even though it's just a really rough measure, if that's all you need to get is just a quick idea of where they're at, their number of words is a real quick, easy way to do that. To a lot of people's other points, I've been finding in my data that students' spelling and sentence level accuracy are constraining their ability to get their ideas on the page, and those aspects of their writing actually predict their M-STEP performance. So the nice thing about working in Michigan, collecting samples in Michigan, I've been able to predict M-STEP. I've been able to collect their M-STEP data and predict M-STEP performance. So we find that in grade 5 especially, and I know on this stuff there's also some spelling items and some grammatical items anyway, so those students' spelling abilities and grammar abilities are directly impacting their MSTEP performance as well as constraining their overall composition. So that was like a really fast run through about assessment, but I can talk about that forever some other time. And I want to be respectful of our time. So I'm just going to give you all an exercise to prepare for November when we meet and hopefully have more in-depth discussions. To get the idea of being a writer yourself, Karen Harris always talks about how we all need to be writers ourselves first. Select a text from your grade level and a purpose for writing. I'm going to ask you to write an informational text, so some type of compare contrast or a description or some other genre of informing, writing to communicate information. Select just a short text, create your own question about it, and then I want you to write for about 15 minutes, write an essay that addresses your prompt. Before you do that, take a blank sheet of paper and plan your response. Take just a couple minutes to jot down some notes about how you plan out your response, and then write your response. And so as you're doing this exercise, do some cognitive monitoring of the things that you're engaging to do that. And we will use this experience throughout the next set of meetings to draw upon and to think about with connecting to instruction. We'll start out the next meeting with reflecting a little bit on this discourse level piece that we talked about, and then dive into the next concept that's for next week. And so that puts us at our time. And I'd be happy to stay on another 5 minutes to talk to people or answer questions.
I want to say that I will send an email with, we'll get a PDF and just send an email of those directions to everyone that has attended for that last piece, so that you have that to bring up, and then I'll send it in our reminder for our next meeting.
Thank you so much for that. And I actually have said, the slides, you can have a copy of the slides. I put them on my website. I'll put the link in the chat. You can download that. And I want to thank Julie and Leslie Laud and others for answering others in the chat. I've been glancing over and seeing some really interesting discussion and stuff that I want to read later and want to follow up on.